Hi everyone, I'm Jannis from ETH in Zurich, and here I speak about our project POCOVID-Net, automatic detection of COVID-19 from a new lung ultrasound imaging dataset. And the main purpose of our project is to make the computer vision and the medical imaging community aware that lung ultrasound can be an extremely powerful tool for detection of COVID-19, especially if certain conditions are given, and we would like to cause a shift in the focus of the computer vision community away from CT and X-ray imaging and more towards ultrasound. Fortunately, we have a lot of testing methods available for COVID-19. We have direct tests like RT-PCR and also indirect tests, imaging, where we have especially CT and X-ray, chest X-ray. But all these methods have advantages but also disadvantages. PCR, for example, is something that takes up to several days to be processed, whereas the imaging techniques, especially CT, which is considered the gold standard and used quite commonly for diagnosis in China, CT is something that exposes the patients to excessive radiation, and it's available only in very good medical conditions. There's only 30,000 CT scanners worldwide, for example. So chest X-ray instead was shown to be much less sensitive in detecting and diagnosing COVID. So, however, we have to answer the question how a medical doctor in a remote area of a third world country can actually detect a local outbreak of the coronavirus. And we do need a solution to this answer, to this question. And we believe that actually repurposing existing technologies is the best shot we have. However, CT will not be available in those areas, and PCR neither. So this is where we believe ultrasound comes in. So ultrasound is a cheap, non-invasive technique that is repeatable, can be performed at patient bedside, is available in almost all medical facilities, and you can do it with portable devices, as you can see there on the right. And it's something that is not preserved to radiologists, but all general practitioners can do. So now looking into the machine learning community, we see that there are more than 100 publications and preprints on using CNNs on CT or chest X-ray data, but 0 on ultrasound, literally. And this is the niche we're trying to fill with this paper. So we're asking the question, can ultrasound accelerate the detection of COVID-19 and can it guide further diagnostic assessment? So we have particularly two situations in mind. First, medical triage, where access to medical resources is limited. And second, third world countries where in generally medical facilities are sparsely equipped. So looking into the role of ultrasound for COVID-19, we find quite a lot of advocacy lately for a more amplified role. Especially there were comparisons in ultrasound and CT, where a timeline of findings across the disease progression of COVID was given for CT and ultrasound. In CT, the most common pattern are these GGOs, ground glass opacities, for which the ultrasound corresponding are the so-called B lines. And also for other patterns, we find corresponding patterns in the ultrasound dependent on the disease progression of the patient. So this points toward the fact that ultrasound may be a reasonable surrogate or proxy for CT data. And however, there was no large clinical dataset available, which is why we had to create one or assemble a dataset from public resources. And this is the first major effort of our contribution. The second major effort is the classification you will see later, and the third major effort is a website, a tool that we provide. So on this dataset effort, we assembled data from publications from COVID-19 cases, but also bacterial pneumonia cases, because we have to consider that the differential diagnosis setting is actually the most interesting. Like differentiating only COVID from healthy is not something that is clinically extremely useful, because detecting that somebody is not healthy, it's easy for a doctor, but actually making the precise diagnosis is often the tough part, right? So we collected data from these three classes, also including data from educational websites for medical doctors. And we also had a few experts, physicians in our team who were so kind to record lung ultrasound data from healthy controls. So this data is publicly available and published on our GitHub alongside the models also. We had a very heterogeneous set on ultrasound machines being used, which is good and bad for the data set at the same time. We mostly so we restricted ourselves to convex probes for all our analysis. However, in the data set there are also linear probes available. We have an overview in here. We even started collecting viral pneumonia, like other types of viral pneumonia that are not COVID. However, we have so little data here that we didn't include that yet in the analysis. This is to date the largest publicly available dataset of lung ultrasound imaging in general, and we're an open access initiative, so this started as a complete free time project, and we are very happy about all kinds of collaborators on whether it's about dataset maintenance or actual model contribution. So let's have a look into what we did. So we attempted frame-based classification, but also 3D CNNs, because ultrasounds are, in contrast to X-ray, it's not static, but it's a video that you record, right? We then performed an explainability analysis, especially using class activation maps and investigating to what extent they can actually highlight pathological patterns in lung ultrasound. And ultimately, we also performed an model robustness analysis using Bayesian uncertainty techniques. So let's have a look at the results. Here we see the results of a 5-fold cross-validation on all the data that we had available. And we can report a 90% accuracy in this 3-class classification. And here if we look at the class-specific accuracies and the sensitivity scores, we see that we obtain a very high sensitivity for COVID, which is about 93%. This is now a frame-based sensitivity, which is not the most interesting metric actually, because you could aggregate, we're not aggregating here the predictions of one video to get one prediction per video, which is what you would actually get, but we will see the video-based models in a second. So we see here in general that we have still 22% false positives, which is to be improved. However, this is rather the type of mistake you would like to make if you have to make a mistake, right? So, but you want a high sensitivity to not miss any COVID patient. In general, we also see that pneumonia is comparably easy to distinguish from the other classes, so the general score for bacterial pneumonia is higher. And we then went ahead and did a couple of ablation studies. We see here the top two are basically the models we've seen on the previous slide also. We here tested a NASNet mobile, which is a very small pre-trained model. All these models were actually pre-trained on ImageNet. This, however, is a model that is so small that it is supposed to be applicable on mobile devices, and as POCUS devices are portable, we investigated this model, however, did not yet find promising results here. However, we then also tested this model here, which actually gave us the best results. So this couples a classification model together with a segmentation model. And for this segmentation, we used the only related work to our project, which basically attempts to use deep learning methods on lung ultrasound in the context of COVID. They don't do a differential diagnosis, but only a severity assessment and a localization of biomarkers. And from these segmentation model, we actually used the embeddings in order to then use them as an input for our classification model. And we get competitive performance with those embeddings here. This is the one setting we explored, and this is the one we have here at the bottom. And the other setting we explored, which is actually the best model that we have, is to feed those highlighted images where you see the COVID-specific markers highlighted here. So this brown thing is a beeline. If we feed those processed colored images into the prediction model, into our very same CNN model, which is basically a pre-trained model and where we employ transfer learning, we get the highest accuracies. So, however, lung ultrasound patterns are spatiotemporal, right? So we investigated 3D CNNs, especially models Jannis, which is a set of pre-trained models for 3D medical imaging. We found that those models did not outperform the frame-based models. Here the numbers we report for the frame-based models are actually aggregated across all frames of a video. And there we report numbers that we actually think are the most informative metrics to report. So there we have a sensitivity of 98%, again in this 5-fold cross-validation, specificity 91%. And these numbers are actually comparable to numbers reported for CT and X-ray also, which gives us hope that ultrasound can indeed be a feasible surrogate for the aforementioned techniques. So then we looked into class activation maps, which is a technique that can highlight the most relevant patterns in an image that drove the classification process. And we asked the question whether this can help to localize pulmonary biomarkers. And we see a couple of examples here. We have on the right side here, this is a COVID-infected lung. In the middle, this is a bacterial pneumonia infected lung. On the left, this is a healthy lung. And we had these class activation maps performed by medical experts. So they had to assign a score in between of -3 and 3. And they gave an average of 0.81, where 3 means extremely helpful for diagnosis and -3 means extremely distracting. So this overall shows that the class activation maps were somehow useful for the doctors. Especially we also did a comparison of training and testing cams, assessing whether actually the cams work only on data that the model has seen during training, which was not the case, fortunately. And here on the right, we see that some patterns are very well recognized by the cams, especially those pneumonia-related consolidations like here. However, with the COVID-specific patterns like B-lines, we have a lot of, we have more problems in highlighting those up to date. But this is extremely instructive for us because it really guides our further work. So this is something that you may have thought about by right now, or that you have already seen somewhere, that those COVID detection models are extremely prone to adversarial examples, obviously. And this is why we not only trained our model on a fourth class, where this fourth class is uninformative and resembles a random subset of ImageNet images alongside ultrasound from other organs, unlike chest and lung. But we also explicitly did attempts towards model robustness, especially confidence estimates, and we performed epistemic and aleatoric model uncertainty estimates using empiric measures from Bayesian statistics, but basically Monte Carlo dropout and test time data augmentation. And in both cases, we observed that the correlation between the confidence of the model and the actual fact whether the prediction was true or false is quite high. So in the epistemic cases, even above 0.4. So the average confidence is 75% for true predictions and 26% for false predictions. So this is, I think, an extremely relevant property of an algorithm to self-detect basically low confidence situation, especially in clinical situations. We then, and this is the last contribution I would briefly like to highlight, because it's not very scientific, but we have a prototype available on POCOVIDscreen.org, where you can use the model, you can upload images, you get predictions out, and in the future we plan to incorporate also the highlighting of the class activation maps in there. And the discussion, we believe that we've shown promising results that ultrasound can be a replacement for CT or X-ray, and that we hope to cause a shift in the machine learning community and medical imaging community to work more on ultrasound in the context of COVID, but we are aware that we need a proper clinical validation of the proposed method, because evidently here we've only worked with data that was aggregated from public sources, at least vastly, not about not all, but about 20% only were actually self-recorded under controlled settings. Ideally, we would like to conduct a clinical study where the predictive power of ultrasound is systematically compared to chest X-ray and CT in a multimodal setting where all modalities are measured from all patients. And with this, I would like to point to our further resources. POCOVID screen I mentioned already, but again, we have all the code and data on Git. There's a manuscript available on archive, which is currently under review. And I would like to thank all the collaborators of this project for their help. And with this, thank you for your attention.